That really depends on the song, I think, and I guess just the current mood or whatever my tastes are at that particular time. Sometimes, depending on the song, it could take a bit of a journey from when it was when the inception was to when it gets captured. We used to say on tape, but when it gets recorded. Steal Away, as with I Hear You, the last song on this most recent album, they both came out of a period in 2019 when I would be writing songs they would start with the Chili Peppers in mind, I guess, but then quickly, especially if they were these slower, sadder piano things, they would sort of get pushed aside and bookmarked to return to later. So with Steal Away, I mean, just when I rediscovered it, the following year when I was collecting ideas for this newer album, and just in line with my current tastes, and in comparison to certain habits and methods of recording in the past, I just was trying to be a little more spacious, a little simpler. I still am trying to do that. I still feel like with every record, with every song, with every recording session, I try and do less and less. And yeah, like you said, there's so many options. There's so many colors to throw at the canvas that I have found in writing the song. Often it's beautiful to just have one or two, 3, 4, not 75, and not pile on things that get in the way of what the listener might connect to, and what clearly I connected to originally when the chords came out of the air. It was just that. It was just chords, and it was just those notes that made me reach for the phone to record it down before I forgot it, and whatever propelled me to play it for 5 or so minutes and allow it to take some sort of shape as a song. Kind of this has been my overarching discussion with myself since I've been making those records on my own, more or less, without the assistance of someone here and there. I'd prefer it just to sound and connect to people as if it was one person in a room, as much as I can, and still sort of serve the song and not make just a solo recording. So that's sort of, I'm trying to limit myself with the overdubs, because you could just sit there and pile on. Because of the somewhat limited time we had to make this record, I did 3 days of work up in Seattle at Studio Litho, at the very end of the recording process, where I was just going through everything and sitting there with a big pedal board and some modular synthesizers, and sort of looking at treatment possibilities or different sounds. And I spent a couple of days putting on things that I have no idea if they belonged there. Like the beginning of Steal Away is one of them. I was just getting loops on guitar, and I remember putting it down and going, I don't know, it doesn't need it. I feel like sometimes you overstep, and sometimes you throw too much at the canvas. I always look for any excuse to involve Nate Walcott and his sensibility and his compositions for everything he did on this album. I really adore. I always think about him ever since we toured together on the last Chili Pepper tour. I always am he's never far from my mind, just that I have such an amazing and talented collaborator, one text message away.
Wit of the Staircase, off the first Hacker album, Inhibition. I've long been a fan of this song, and there's always been a mysterious element to it that I've always responded to. So even after I asked Josh in a general way how the song came about, I found that the song still retained that mysterious appreciation for me, if you will. And it's kind of at odds with that myth that, once you find out what a song is about, it doesn't mean as much, or it can kind of change its coordinates with you, or however you want to word it. I just found that that's not the case with this song. Lastly, the song has this amazing, syncopated, yet highly melodic bass line, played by Hacker bassist Jonathan Hischke, so I just was sure to inquire about that line as well.
Wit of the Staircase is a song that was based on a Vanity Fair article called "The Golden Suicides" about a couple, Teresa Duncan and Jeremy Blake. They were both artists in different mediums. Teresa was a writer of sorts, and then she had an early blog, and I think she had a CD-ROM type game. It's been a while since I've checked in with that story, but she was in a relationship with a fellow called Jeremy Blake, who is a visual artist. His work is in the Paul Thomas Anderson movie Punch Drunk Love, and it was featured behind me when I was playing in Beck's band in 2003. It was also featured behind me to some extent at my sister's wedding when I got up impromptu, said a few words, and spoke about the Wit of the Staircase, because I should have said something to my brother-in-law Doug's mother the night before, and that's what Wit of the Staircase means. I think the French translation is a little more elegant sounding, but it just means the thing that you should have said in the past, that the thing that you remember that you should have said as you're leaving. And that was the name of Teresa Duncan's blog, and again, early in the days of blogging. But they increasingly found themselves sort of spiraling toward some sort of isolation, or either from the rest of the world or from each other internally, perhaps. And they had this sort of tragic end where she killed herself, and then he followed suit and did the same thing a week later. It just seemed like a tragic story, and I read this article. There's all sorts of other angles, all sorts of other things involved that piqued my interest. Bret Easton Ellis I think he had written a screenplay about it, so that was something that I was interested and excited by. I think Gus Van Sant for a second was involved in that screenplay, or at least talking to Bret about making it. So there was this story that I was sort of obsessed with and mildly following as much as you could follow a movie that's not made, when I was in my early days of looking for songwriting, things to write songs about, or my early days in the band in Dot Hacker, getting those songs together, I somehow turned that story into that song. So that's where that comes from, that song. And then I texted Jonathan about the bass, and he says, the main bits are a regular bass doubled with a Roland synth bass, with the parts played slightly differently so they bounce around off one another. The distorted parts are a bass played through, he thinks, a Tech 21 bass double XL alongside the double synth bass, and with an octave pedal added for the extra heavy parts. That's what he thinks. And Jonathan is a very detailed bass composer, and I trust that if he's not 100% accurate, it's something as creative and thoughtful as that. That song is one of the highlights of that first Dot Hacker album, and showing what Jonathan can do. And he's definitely a player and a musician unto his own. He's like no one I've ever seen. That song was an example of the first Dot Hacker writing period, the block of the first few songs. I think there were four, 5, or 6 of them that we consider. It's like the original 6 in the NHL. The original couple of songs that we wrote together in our initial burst of togetherness. That was one of them. But that was always a really fun one for me to play live. I'm still very curious about that story involving Teresa Duncan and Jeremy Blake,
which closes out their second of 2 EPs released in 2014. I asked Josh how his approach to the piano translates musical ideas differently than perhaps other instruments. Additionally, there's this wonderful orchestral arrangement running throughout this piece, and I inquired about that as well.
The piano is just this mysterious thing that I've had in... I think we've always had a piano. Maybe the first couple years of my life we didn't, but we've always had a piano in the house growing up, and I always loved playing it. I taught myself how to play as well as I can, and somehow, like everything else, can play a little bit. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a good piano player, or a truly competent piano player, but I really enjoy writing on it, just because I think it's still so mysterious to me. When I use my limited theoretical knowledge and I kind of apply it, I find more mystery there. On the guitar, I have that to a degree, but I'm a little more knowledgeable about what my hands are doing there. That was written on a piano that I was housing for the Silver Lake Conservatory of Music. They had a grand piano that they needed to store somewhere for a little while. So it came over to my house and lived for a bit. And I came up with a series of songs on it, because I was playing it all the time. Now, I know Memory was written on that thing. Maybe Rest Assured. Anger, yeah, I just, that was just a chord progression that started one day and a melody to follow. And the string arrangement was written by Vanessa Fried Barron-Smith, which is the cellist who plays a bit on the new Plural One album. And she's actually I think she's been a part of every record I've made in the last several years. I met her on the Gnarls Barkley tour in 2006, and she's a mind-blowingly, dumbfoundingly incredible musician who I'm absolutely in awe of, and so lucky to have her nearby to color songs that I'm working on. And this was an arrangement that she wrote, and it's just phenomenal. The day I read this question, I was trying to remember how this came about, and I think I had worked with a couple different people on arrangements before, and then Vanessa was always a little shy to do any of the actual composing, and for some reason she did this one, and it's I told her the day I read this question, I told her that it's just it's insane to me that she would be shy about it, because it's just phenomenal to me. Anyway, I always had such a kick get such a kick out of watching people record strings to songs that I came up with. I love it more than, there's very few things I love more than watching that. So this arrangement and that one in particular was such a precious moment and such a precious memory. And I remember when, after the strings went on, and the way there's very minimal but very impactful drums or synth drums, this song had a particular puzzle to it in terms of mixing and getting it in order after all the ingredients were there. And Clint came into the studio one day and, like Leonard Bernstein, just sort of waved his arms around and pointed and gestured, and within a few minutes before us was this beautifully organized recording that had, lots of overdubs and a string section and upright bass and all these elements, and Clint made sense of it very quickly. That song has a lot of fond memories for me. I also did the vocal, was meant to be just a guide vocal. I did it really quickly, being late to a birthday party that was being held at my house for someone else. And I remember that. So I remember just singing it once and leaving, and then coming back to it and being really thrilled with what came out of my mouth. I really consider that song a triumph musically, especially, just the way all the elements sit with each other.
Next, I asked about his song Save, which is the third track from his first Plural One release, To Be One With You. I asked about a particular percussive element that was running through the second verse of the song that caught my attention. And I also asked about what becomes of the songs that don't make it to the CD, or that just don't really make the final cut, if you will.
Save was written on July 4th, 2015, or rather the music was, and I remember that being an enormously productive day for some reason. I just must have been in a good mood, and I was all alone in my what is now my former workspace, which is still a space, a music space that my friend uses. I came up with several ideas that day. Save was written at 3:01 p.m., and it looks like Fall From Grace, which wound up being on the same album, was written at 2:37 p.m. And now as I look back to check the time, there was a song that I titled All Is Right Today, which shows I must have been in a really good place, at 2:27 p.m. So for some reason that one hasn't seen the light of day, but that kind of speaks to another question of yours about what do I do with pieces that don't get developed. And I don't know for what reason certain ones don't get developed. Maybe I just remember ones better than others. I do keep a pretty good record of all my ideas, and I've developed a system over the years, and as you can tell, I know exactly the moment they were recorded. So yeah, when I start looking back for ideas to work on, if I don't come up with something right then and there, I have I have years and years of stuff to pick from. And sometimes things just stick in my mind and I play the chords to myself over time, and they develop a little more or they don't. And it's just a matter of when I have the right amount of time and the right sort of emotional bearings to speak to the music, I guess, lyrically, and when I can develop some songs sort of develop lyrically right away, and some take a little time to find themselves. But yeah, Save was one. I titled it Save straight away and probably had some of the lyric, but that one was a little hard for me to make into a finished song, because I think it was one of the ones, as was Fall from Grace, where I was trying to transcribe some of the sounds that I was making with my mouth that day. So I was trying to write words that sounded like what naturally came out in an improvisational way that day, and I think I was sort of stuck and I was trying to make sense of it. So I do remember that song being a little hard for me lyrically, just because I kept feeling like I could do better, but still liking some of it. Yeah, I wound up feeling like that song was a little shy of the mark, but a very good friend of mine whose opinion I trust more than most really likes that song and said very kind things about it. More and more I get less and less trustful of my own taste, my own opinions. Save was a funny one, and it's the one I think of often when I bemoan the way To Be One With You was recorded, in the sense that it kept having to start and stop, and I had gone back to work with the band at that time, and I had done a demo of Save in my garage, and used the Roland CR78 drum machine that day on the demo. And then when it came time to produce it properly for the record, after tracking the piano or at Prairie Sun Studios up north, I was sort of at a loss. I didn't know what to add to it. I'd done the drums up north too. Yeah, it was one of those that I think of as sort of, I was running out of time. I was already back to work with the Chili Peppers, so my attention was sort of elsewhere, and I just was trying to wrap up some of these recordings as quickly as possible. So I wound up doing on Save virtually the same things I did on the demo. So the demo sounds pretty similar to the finished album version. The end of that song always reminded me of one of my favorite Björk songs, which is called Unison on Vespertine, just kind of going back and forth between those two chords and singing over them in a similar melody over and over again. But yeah, the tugboat lyric always cracked Eric Palmquist up. And that was a perfect example of something that I had written that I just liked the way it sounded, or perhaps that's what it sounded like on the improv recording. I was sort of at a loss. I didn't know what to add to it. I'd done the drums up north too. Yeah, it was one of those that I think of as sort of, I was running out of time. I was already back to work with the Chili Peppers, so my attention was sort of elsewhere, and I just was trying to wrap up some of these recordings as quickly as possible. So I wound up doing on Save virtually the same things I did on the demo. So the demo sounds pretty similar to the finished album version. The end of that song always reminded me of one of my favorite Björk songs, which is called Unison on Vespertine, just kind of going back and forth between those two chords and singing over them in a similar melody over and over again. But yeah, the tugboat lyric always cracked Eric Palmquist up. And that was a perfect example of something that I had written that I just liked the way it sounded, or perhaps that's what it sounded like on the improv recording on July 4th, 2015 at 3:01 p.m. And I just could never get anything better. I couldn't get anything that felt more natural for that moment of the song. But I think all those kind of stories that I have like that, where it took me a long time to finish a song for this reason or that, it's just made me do nothing more than really try and focus harder on completing something, whether it's, trying to do the lyrics all at once, or if I start something I like, I try and make more of an effort to bring it to completion sooner, so it doesn't take several years in this case. That kind of speaks to both questions here, I guess. So the song that I just found just now, called All Is Right Today, from July 4th, 2015. Look for that sometime in the near future, because I really like these chords. I'll have to sit down and transcribe the gibberish that I said that afternoon, but that's always a fun challenge. Oh yeah, and the percussion that comes in at some point during Save, that was the water pipes in the corner of the room at Prairie Sun Studio, in the little broom closet, which is known as the Waits room. And that was the reason I was drawn to that studio. Tom Waits recorded Bone Machine and Mule Variations there. And you hear those same water pipes in many of the songs on Bone Machine for sure. There's a beautiful tracking room, and then in an adjacent room there's the control room of sorts in another big open space. But then toward the back of that room, there's what was once just a utility closet, but it's pretty spacious. And that's where Tom Waits decided the best sounds came from. So that has since been dubbed the Waits room. Just going to that studio, taking a bit of a road trip, and having Jack Irons, who lived down the road at the time, come by, and that made the recording of that record special. And that's what I mean about it, the sessions being broken up. Once we did a week up there, came back down and worked on it a little bit. I took a bit of a break and started working with the band again, and then resumed a couple months later. But yeah, those water pipes, I tried to put them many more places on the record. I think they made their way perhaps into another song or two I can't think of right now. I think they're on a song that's yet to come out called It's a Good Thing. I think they might be in Fairy Tale. Is that possible? B-side from that album? I did the vocals to Fairy Tale and another song in the Waits room. We had to get a couple vocals in before we left. Oh yeah, You Don't Know What You're Doing. That vocal was done in there. Apparently on the same microphone that Tom Waits used for a lot of that album.
I've noticed that Josh's music possesses what I would describe as a healthy relationship with space and approach. How his songs feel well-rounded but not oversaturated, without any gimmicks or formula or anything like that. So I asked him to explain his general approach when writing his songs. And I also asked, in addition, just how often he spends crafting that material.
How often do I spend writing music? I guess it depends what life is doing, what kind of life I'm living at that time. If I had my druthers, I would be doing it all the time. The beginning of March, April 2020, it was every day, all day. And then I started recording, and then I started working on lyrics mostly to the songs that I had been doing. So, kind of still always coming up with new ideas. I'm buried beneath a pile of musical ideas. So there's never a shortage of things to write to or work on, but I'm still always coming up with new ideas. And I've figured out how I work best, I think, and just making sure to get everything down. If there's something that I like, even in the littlest bit, I get it down so I can build upon it later. I think sometimes things can write themselves from start to finish in one go, and sometimes things take sometimes they need training wheels for a bit. But yeah, often, I guess that might speak to how developed or how much I connect with an idea or a piece of music, is how much I can see its journey right at the beginning, and thinking about overdubs or the kind of sounds I want to put on them later. Some of them, at least a lot on this current Plural One album, a lot of them kind of said what they wanted to say to me in the first of their existence. So I'm trying not to pollute the original spirit of an idea or a song with too many overdubs or extra sounds. I think being an editor and self-editing and really having something of an honest dialogue with yourself about the work you do is important. I mean, maybe it doesn't always have to be quote unquote honest, whatever that means. But just kind of checking in and being able to look at yourself objectively and what you do objectively. I mean, sometimes I'm sure that doesn't help. Sometimes people might have the tendency to look at their work and look at themselves a little too negatively and let decades pass without actually committing to anything and doing anything that they're proud of because of these uncontrollable insecurities and emotions that their brain somehow puts into words. All that stuff. I mean, I just found the more and more you work and the more and more, if you can, the more and more you just do it, you'll sort of sand away some of these bad habits. But yeah, the editing side, I've been thinking about that a lot these days. You know, the classic listening to old work and sort of, you know, feeling like it's just hidden beneath a pile of noise. I mean, I feel like that's something I have that experience often. So yeah, I really encourage people to think about simplicity and you know, trying to have a connection with the idea, the simple basic idea before going forward, because I think that'll help dictate where the song wants to go. I've been saying to people lately that I want to hear music that's just vocals and drums, vocals and rhythms. So I haven't convinced myself of that when I'm in the studio, but that's what I'm working toward. I just kind of want rhythms and melody.
He does mention a video that he was prepping for, and that video has been released. You can find it on YouTube, along with many other plural1.hacker Josh Klinghoffer videos. It is a website.
Shade, the lyrics. Funny you should ask that just now, because I just listened to that song 3 times in a row, going over possible edits or different approaches to editing a live video together for you know, a sort of COVID era split screen 2020 live performance, internet posting approach. And having listened 3 times, I still can't think of all the lyrics right now. But that song in particular, I do remember that there were pages and pages and post-it upon post-it of lyrics. Tons of different things that I thought worked well with the chords and the melody and the just the sort of emotional charge of the song. And very sadly, I had to whittle them down. But there's still many a verse that didn't make it that I like. That's the lyric writing process. Some songs aren't always that plentiful. There aren't always that many options to choose from. And depending on how long a song hangs around in my mind or in my, you know, in the oven, different kinds of lyric can come, you know, one day, and then 2 or 3 months later another entire type of lyric or sort of angle to the theme might show itself. And a lot of the time the process for me is collecting that. In the past, as I've said before, I've been terrible at finishing things, and it's mainly because I either, or maybe a combination of not being able to sit still long enough, but always having something to do and not being good at the discipline to sit there and finish a song right then and there, which I feel like I'm getting better at. But yeah, for me, a lot of the time the process is corralling sometimes years worth of notes and years or just pages and bits and pieces of paper here and there with different lyrics on them, and sort of trying to make some sort of coherent sense out of them. Sometimes I do it to do the musical version of that, or the oral version of that, where I listen to and I try and transcribe what I'm saying. But more often than not, it's the collecting of different thoughts and ideas and trying to turn them into something that makes sense, at least to me. Once in a blue moon, if I'm able to feel free enough to, I will sit down and write something lyrically start to finish. I've done that more so than ever in the last year, which for me has felt very good, even in the midst of this tragic period that we find ourselves in. I do that musically all the time, sit down at the piano or the guitar and sort of come up with a finished song, basically improving, sort of picking the chords on the fly and finding myself a full song. And then it's the next step is just sort of finding something that I'm interested in saying, which is often the hardest part for me, just because so many things have been said, and I have a pretty specific sound that I want. So even if there's something I want to communicate, I have to do it with the words that fit those sounds. So that's what I feel it is. It's like sculpting for me. It's just lots of clay covered wet hands. It's a mess, and there's lots of double-sided tape and post-it notes.
When I ordered the CD, which I was excited to hear, I put it on and I was drinking coffee and looking out the window, and when Plank came on, I had one of those magical moments that we could sometimes get as music listeners, where we remember where we were the first time we heard a song, and I had that with Plank right away, and something about it just felt really appropriate, and I hadn't responded to a song like that in a long time. And I just want to personally thank Josh for writing Plank, and I want to thank him again for taking the time to answer all these questions that we had. And this is Josh discussing how Plank came to be, and we will close out the segment with the song.
This song, Plank, this song was one of the original songs written that first week or two when the shutdown, quarantine, pandemic began in 2020. When I sort of realized that I was free to just do nothing but work at home. This was one of those original songs, and I believe I just called it Plank. I can't remember exactly why, but sometimes a word will just pop into my mind, and that'll become what I call the idea in my very detailed ideas folder, and then when I return back to it, I might use that word as a jumping off, no pun intended, point for the lyric. And I don't know why. I mean, I think perhaps the music reminded me of someone being forced to stand out atop the sea, perhaps not by their own accord, and then if they jump or whatever happens, that's the second part of the song, when the drums come in. And the drums are heavily influenced my listening to the band Kchung a lot in the last couple of years, and I program them, and they're supposed to, on the little thing I was using a lot to get drum beats for this album. I would often use this app on the iPad called the DM1, just because it was so easy. It was sitting there right next to the piano. I would do that as a starting point, which is quicker for me than using an old drum box. But then Jack Irons doubled the drums that I programmed, or mostly doubled, just played along, and that they're mixed in perfectly. It still sounds like the slightly overdriven programmed drums, but with he a couple of extra bits of the wonderful Jack feel and sensibility underneath. That song to me is a real special one. I'm really happy with the way that turned out, and that's another Nate Walcott appearance. With the strings in that one. Trying to look at the question here. Yeah, that song was written pretty quickly as well. That song was, if I came up with the music on a Monday, let's say, I'm sure the lyrics were finished by the following Monday. And the songwriting process for the second album, I would write on these songs that I wrote at the beginning of the shutdown. I was really intent on doing a demo a day. So even if the song wasn't completely finished lyrically, I would put the music down and then write to that. And just because, again, there was nothing but time to work, things happened rather quickly. And for a while, at least, I was recording a song a day. And I was texting friends about that. And, there were a couple of people I knew that were sort of doing that same thing, that same approach, trying to get something down every day. And then just in those little sort of creative, exciting sort of creative collectives, I felt like I was doing my part to and upholding my end by getting something done every day. So that's how a lot of the songs at the beginning of the pandemic were written, just making sure I got something recorded every day, and then writing lyrics to them fairly soon after that, driving around usually and singing along.